Welcome to tonight's sleep story. Let's drift into a soothing story together as you begin your journey into a restful and rejuvenating sleep. In a time long ago, in a kingdom surrounded by lush forests and flowing rivers, there lived a beautiful young princess named Eliza. The sun seemed to shine a little brighter in this kingdom, as if the very skies were smiling down upon the people. Elisa's heart was filled with joy because of the deep bond she shared with her 11 brothers. They were more than just family. They were her companions, her friends, her partners in adventure. Together, they would wander the fields, climb trees, and play by the sparkling river that ran through the heart of their land. Their laughter echoed through the castle and the kingdom, a melody of happiness that seemed to never end. Elisa's life was simple and full. Each day, she woke up to the sound of birds singing outside her window and the warmth of the sun streaming through the trees. Her brothers were always by her side, and their bond was unbreakable. The castle, with its tall spires and winding corridors, was a place of comfort and love. Elisa could always hear the sounds of her brothers' footsteps echoing through the halls, their voices calling out to her, bringing a smile to her face every time. The princess was known for her gentle nature and her love for nature. She spent hours each day in the royal gardens, walking barefoot on the soft grass and picking flowers with her brothers. She found peace in the world around her family, the breeze in her hair, the scent of roses blooming in the castle courtyard. Life was perfect. Every moment felt like a dream come true, but within the castle walls, there was a darkness that Eliza did not yet understand. Her stepmother, the queen, was a woman of hidden jealousy and bitterness. She had never shared the same warmth and love that Elisa's father, the king, did for the children. Although Elisa had grown up surrounded by affection and care, there was always something unsettling about the queen's coldness toward her. The queen's beauty was known far and wide, but beneath her beauty there was a dark, envious soul that could never truly understand the innocence and joy Eliza carried with her. One day, as Eliza sat by the window watching her brothers play, in the garden she felt a shift in the air. Something was about to change, but she did not know it yet. Her stepmother's eyes, once focused on her own reflection, now glinted with a strange malice. The queen began to look upon Eliza and her brothers with envy, and her jealousy began to grow like a dark cloud, threatening to overshadow the sunshine that had always blessed the royal family. But even in the face of this quiet brewing storm, Eliza remained unaware. Her heart was too full of love for her family, too immersed in the beauty of the world around her. Her brothers and her love for them were her entire world, and in her mind, nothing could take that away. She had no reason to suspect that the happiness she held so dearly could be shattered by the cruelty of the queen. Life, for her, would always remain bright and untouched by darkness. However, deep within the queen's heart, a plan began to form, one that would turn Elisa's world upside down. The curse she would cast on Elisa's brothers would change everything. Elisa, in her innocence, could never foresee the devastation about to befall her beloved family. One fateful day, as the young Princess Eliza wandered through the castle gardens, Picking flowers with her brothers, a dark shadow began to loom over their happiness. The air was thick with an unnatural stillness, and the birds that once filled the air with song were suddenly silent. Elisa's brothers, ever playful and carefree, suddenly fell quiet, their smiles fading as they looked toward the castle. The queen, whose presence had always been cold and distant, had grown more obsessed with her own beauty and jealousy toward Elisa's happiness. She saw in the princess not only a young, innocent soul, but a rival to the power she craved, to the love she believed should have been hers alone. Elisa's connection with her brothers, her undivided attention to them, began to consume the queen's thoughts, stirring up her envy. With a heart full of bitterness, the queen cast a dark spell on the 11 brothers, transforming them into wild swans. The beautiful, mischievous boys Eliza had always known, the companions of her childhood, were no longer by her side. They were no longer human, but trapped in the bodies of swans, doomed to live this way until Eliza could break the curse. The queen, satisfied with her cruel work, left Eliza to suffer in isolation, watching as her world began to crumble. Elisa, unaware of the magical forces her stepmother wielded, searched the castle in a panic, calling out to her brothers. When she reached the garden, she saw them, the swans, floating on the nearby lake, their wings beating in the wind. She ran to them, her heart breaking as she saw their once human faces peering out from beneath the white feathers, their eyes full of longing and helplessness. The sight was so devastating that Eliza nearly fell to her knees. Asterisk, the swans circled the lake, their graceful wings beating as though they wanted to comfort her, but Eliza was unable to understand. Her brothers were no longer the playful children who once made her laugh. They were enchanted creatures trapped in the form of wild swans, forever bound to the lake. Elisa collapsed to the ground, feeling the weight of her loss. She called their names, but they could not respond. They were unable to break the curse on their own dot in that moment of despair. The queen's voice echoed in Elisa's ears, cold and mocking. "Your brothers are mine now," she declared. "You will never see them as they were. You must break the spell, but to do so, you must sacrifice everything." Elisa's heart filled with dread, and she knew at once that the task ahead of her would not be simple. It would demand great sacrifice, and so the queen's curse had left Eliza with no choice but to face the impossible. To break the spell, she would have to weave 11 shirts from nettles, each one needing to be perfect, and she could not speak for 6 long years. The curse required Eliza to surrender her voice, and in doing so, she would have to face years of hardship, with only the knowledge that her brother's fate rested in her hands. "I will not fail them," Eliza whispered to herself, her voice trembling. The grief in her heart was overwhelming, but she could not afford to give up. Her brothers needed her, and no matter what it took, she would find a way to bring them back. The days stretched into weeks, and the weeks grew into months as Eliza began her daunting task. The isolation was suffocating, and the silence around her was deafening. Without her brothers to comfort her, without even a single word to speak, she was left alone with her thoughts. The forest surrounding her home became her only companion, the whispers of the wind through the trees, the only sound that broke the oppressive silence. Elisa spent her days gathering nettles from the woods. The sharp, stinging plants tore at her hands, but she pressed on, each painful wound a reminder of the burden she carried. Her fingers bled, but she never stopped. Each nettle was transformed into threads for the shirts, each moment of pain adding to the sacrifice that seemed endless. The blisters on her palms and the tenderness in her shoulders were but small prices to pay for the chance to save her brothers. Elisa thought about them constantly, wondering where they were, imagining what it must be like for them trapped in the bodies of swans, unable to speak or express the pain they must feel. The days were long, and Elisa's body grew weaker as the months passed, but her determination remained unshaken. She could not afford to falter. Each night, when she lay down to sleep, she would dream of her brothers, of their human faces, their laughter, and the joyful moments they had shared as children. In these dreams, the pain of her silent world would fade, replaced by the warmth of their presence. But when she woke, the weight of the silence would settle back on her shoulders, heavier than before. Asterisk one night, as Elisa worked by the faint light of the moon, a soft rustling noise echoed from the forest. Her heart leaped in her chest, hoping it was one of her brothers come to find her, but as she peered into the darkness, there was no sign of them. The rustling sound was only the wind, but it reminded her of how much she missed the voices of her family. She longed to hear their laughter, to speak their names aloud, to share even a single moment of joy in her suffering. But the curse bound her to silence, and she had no choice but to continue weaving. One day, as she finished weaving the seventh shirt, she realized that her task was halfway complete. But as she looked at the pile of nettles and the shirts that were slowly taking shape, she realized that the burden was becoming too great to bear alone. The physical strain was immense, and the constant loneliness was beginning to erode her spirit. She missed the simple sound of a voice, the comfort of being able to speak, to express the turmoil in her heart. But despite the isolation, Eliza felt a glimmer of hope inside her, as fragile as the shirts she was weaving. She could not stop now. The thought of her brothers, still in the form of swans, kept her moving forward, her resolve stronger than the silence that surrounded her. Each shirt she completed, the weight of the curse seemed to grow lighter, as if the very act of weaving was drawing her closer to her brothers. But the journey was far from over, and Eliza knew that the final challenge awaited her. Even though she had not spoken a word, for months she felt an inner strength growing, a strength born of love and sacrifice. And she knew that nothing would stop her from completing her task. The weeks stretched on, and Elisa's resolve never wavered. The nettles had left deep scars on her hands, the tips of her fingers raw and aching. She had learned to ignore the pain, each stitch becoming a prayer for her brother's return. The lonely forest around her seemed to grow darker as the days went by, but the light of the moon always found its way through the canopy of trees, illuminating the paper-thin fabric she worked so tirelessly on. Her mind was filled with memories, of her brothers, their laughter and games. In her solitude, these memories kept her going, reminding her of the love they had shared. But despite her determination, Elisa was beginning to feel the weight of her burden pressing heavily upon her chest. The air felt colder, and the wind seemed to whisper through the trees more ominously. The nights were longer, and the silence was more deafening than ever. The curse, it seemed, was designed not only to challenge her physically, but to break her spirit, to make her question whether her sacrifice would truly be worth it in the end. There were moments when her mind wandered, when she felt so isolated that the immensity of her task seemed insurmountable. Elisa took a deep breath, brushing a strand of hair from her face as she continued to work. She could hear the soft rustle of leaves in the distance, the faint call of an owl in the dark, but it was only the sound of the world carrying on without her. She was alone, and yet, in some strange way, she had come to find comfort in the quiet. There was something oddly peaceful in the solitude, as if it gave her the space to focus completely on her task without distraction. As she worked, the last of the 11 shirts came into shape, and a strange feeling settled over her. It was a feeling of completion, but also of foreboding. The end was in sight, and yet the price of it weighed heavy on her heart. She had woven 10 shirts, each one more painful to make than the last, and now she was finishing the final shirt. It was the hardest, the most intricate, and she could feel the tears of frustration and exhaustion welling up in her eyes. Yet she refused to let them fall. The final shirt must be perfect. There was no room for failure, no time for weakness. She worked through the night, the moonlight casting a gentle glow on her work. Every thread she wove seemed to stretch the very fibers of her being. The nettles pricked her skin as she wove each intricate stitch, but she didn't flinch. This last shirt, the one she had saved for the final moment, would be the key to breaking the curse. The hours passed and her mind began to drift. She thought of her brothers, once so full of life, now cursed to wander the skies in their swan forms. She thought of how she had been unable to speak to them, how her love for them had remained unspoken, and how it had weighed on her heart every day. She had suffered in silence, but now, with the final shirt in her hands, she knew that her silence would soon be broken. Not by her voice, but by the act of love and sacrifice she had given so willingly. As the last thread was woven, Elisa let out a long, shuddering breath. She had done it. The shirt was complete, and with that final stitch, a strange, soft light filled the room, as if the world itself had acknowledged the sacrifice she had made. The weight that had been pressing on her chest seemed to lift, and for the first time in years, Elisa felt a sense of release, as if the air itself had shifted. The spell was nearly broken. Her brothers were so close to returning to their true forms, but then, as she stood there, gazing at the shirt she had completed, she felt a chill crawl up her spine. The queen, the wicked stepmother, had always been a looming presence, but now Elisa could feel the malice in the air. The final task was completed, but the queen would not let Elisa succeed without a final test. Elisa could feel it in evil, presence stirring, watching from the shadows. Elisa clutched the shirt to her chest, her heart pounding, but she didn't hesitate. She knew that the sacrifice had been worth it. The final test would come, but no matter what happened next, she had done all that she could. Her brothers would return and she would break the curse, even if she had to face the queen's wrath. Alone, Elisa stood at the edge of the forest, the first light of dawn spilling softly through the trees, casting a pale glow across the shirts she had woven. With the final shirt now complete, her heart raced with a mixture of exhaustion, hope, and fear. Her fingers ached from the countless nettles she had woven into threads. Her body weak from years of silence and sacrifice, but she had done it. She had fulfilled the impossible task set by the curse, each shirt a labor of love and devotion. Her brothers, trapped in their swan forms, were close to being freed, but as she held the last shirt in her hands, Elisa felt the presence of the queen looming like a shadow at the edge of her vision. The queen had always been there, a cold and cruel force in her life, and though Eliza had fought with all her strength to break the curse, she knew that the queen would not allow her to succeed without one last obstacle. Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden sharp gust of wind, and the trees whispered ominously around her dot. It was then that the queen's voice rang out, harsh and mocking. "You think you can break my curse, dear Eliza? You think your efforts will be enough to undo the magic I have wrought? You are nothing but a child, lost in your foolish dreams of love and family. You will never succeed." The queen's cruel laughter echoed through the trees, chilling Eliza to the bone, but Eliza didn't falter. She clutched the shirt to her chest and felt a surge of determination. She had come too far to be stopped now. The queen's words were nothing more than hollow threats. Elisa knew the power of her love for her brothers. That love had fueled her sacrifice for 6 years, and it was the only thing that mattered now. With a deep breath, Elisa stepped forward, heading toward the lake, where her brothers had been transformed into swans. The water was calm, but the air was thick with tension, as if the entire world was holding its breath. The moment of truth had arrived. As she reached the edge of the water, Elisa felt the cold, familiar presence of the swans on the lake. Their wings beat gently against the water as they glided toward her, their faces still bearing the same look of longing that had haunted Elisa's heart for years. She could feel their love for her, even without words, and in that moment, she knew that they had never truly forgotten her. With trembling hands, Elisa took the final shirt and threw it over the youngest swan, her dear brother who had once been, the one who had always protected her. As the shirt settled over him, the air around them began to shimmer with a soft, glowing light. Elisa's heart skipped a beat as she watched, her breath caught in her chest. The curse was breaking, one by one. The swans began to transform, their graceful, powerful bodies shifting back into human form. Elisa's brothers stood before her, their faces shining with joy and disbelief. They were human again, their features restored, their eyes sparkling with gratitude and relief. They rushed toward her, enveloping her in their arms, their love, an affection overwhelming. Elisa felt tears of joy in her eyes, a soft, contented smile playing on her lips. But as the transformation completed, the last thing Eliza felt was the presence of the queen. In that instant, Eliza could sense that her stepmother's magic had been undone, that the queen's evil had lost its hold over her family. Elisa's sacrifice had broken the curse, and her brothers were free at last. The queen, defeated by Elisa's unwavering love, vanished like a shadow in the wind. Her cruelty, her malice, had been silenced by the power of Elisa's devotion, and with it, the darkness that had loomed over the family dissipated. The sun broke through the clouds, bathing the garden in warm light, as if the world itself had embraced the victory of love and sacrifice. Elisa's brothers, now fully restored, gathered around her, their faces beaming with gratitude. They had witnessed the depth of Elisa's strength and love, and now they were finally free to live again. Elisa had saved them, and in doing so, she had proven that love and sacrifice, no matter how great the challenge, would always triumph. Transformation was complete. The final swan had become a man, and Eliza stood surrounded by her 11 brothers, all restored to their human forms. Their faces, once marked by the sorrow and despair of their cursed fate, now shone with the joy of freedom. The years of silence, sacrifice, and solitude were finally over. Elisa's heart swelled with a deep sense of relief and happiness, but also with an undeniable tiredness. The weight of the long years spent in silence had left its mark on her. Yet there was no more sorrow, no more darkness, only the joy of being reunited with those she loved most. For the first time in what felt like forever, Eliza felt the cool breeze on her face without the constant burden of the curse hanging over her. She breathed in deeply, feeling the air fill her lungs and clear away the heaviness of years of pain. Her brothers, now standing beside her, looked at her with admiration and gratitude, their eyes filled with affection and awe. They could not find the words to express how much Elisa's sacrifice meant to them, but in the way they looked at her, it was clear that they understood. "You saved us, Eliza," her youngest brother said softly, his voice filled with emotion. "We were lost, but you found us. You never gave up on us, even when it seemed like there was no hope." Elisa smiled faintly, her eyes bright with unshed tears. She had never expected gratitude for her sacrifice. Her love for them had always been enough. But now, as they all stood together, she realized how much their love had nourished her spirit. Her brothers were no longer the swans that had haunted her dreams. They were once again the playful, kind-hearted souls she had grown up with. And with their return, a new chapter in their lives began. Together, they walked back toward the castle. The once distant towers, now bathed in the soft glow of twilight, stood proudly in the horizon like a beacon of hope. The land that had once seemed so cold and empty now felt like a home again, filled with warmth and light. Elisa felt a sense of peace as she walked alongside her brothers, their laughter and chatter filling the air. She no longer had to stay silent. Her voice was no longer a curse, but a gift she could share. When they reached the castle, the king, Elisa's father, was there to greet them. His face was filled with both astonishment and joy, and as he saw His sons once more in human form, he couldn't help but shed a tear of relief. He embraced each of them, his hands trembling with gratitude. Then his gaze turned to Elisa, who stood beside her brothers, her eyes full of quiet pride. "You have done what no one else could," the king said, his voice thick with emotion. "You have brought our family back together. Your strength, your courage, and your love have restored us all." Elisa looked at her father, and in that moment, she finally understood the true power of her sacrifice. It had not been about the shirts or the silence. It had been about love, about her devotion to her family, and the willingness to endure any hardship for those she held dear. She had learned that true strength was not in the absence of hardship, but in the ability to face it with grace, courage, and love. The journey she had gone through was more than just the breaking of a curse. It had been a path of growth and transformation dawed as the family reunited in the castle. Elisa found herself standing at the threshold of a new life, one filled with love, freedom, and togetherness. The curse was broken, but the bond between Eliza and her brothers would never be undone. It was unbreakable, forged in the fires of sacrifice and loyalty. That night, as they all gathered around a warm hearth in the castle's grand hall, Eliza finally found her voice. The sound of her laughter, once silenced by the curse, filled the room like a melody. Her brothers laughed with her, the joy in the air palpable. The pain of the past had melted away, and in its place there was only peace. The curse was gone, the love had triumphed, and family, the foundation of it all, had been restored. The castle was a place of joy once again. The air was filled with the warmth of laughter, the scent of food wafting from the kitchens, and the soft hum of life returning to normal. The brothers, now free from the curse, had taken their places at the table once more, but Eliza couldn't help but notice the change in them. There was a quiet gratitude in their eyes, an unspoken bond that came from having experienced something so profound together. Elisa, though her silence had been broken, found herself more reflective than ever before. As she sat by the fire, watching the flames flicker in the hearth, she thought about the long years she had spent weaving the shirts and enduring her isolation. She thought about the pain she had felt, not just in her hands from the nettles, but in her heart as she had yearned for her brothers. She had never spoken a word during those years, but her thoughts had always been filled with love that had driven her to sacrifice her voice for them. It was a sacrifice that had cost her deeply, but it had also taught her something invaluable, the true depth of love. Her brothers, now restored to their full selves, sat around her recounting the memories of their time as swans, a time they could not fully comprehend, but one that had marked them all the same. They spoke of the years of wandering, the longing they had felt to be with their sister, the hope that somehow she would find a way to break the curse. Each of them, in their own way, had suffered in their transformation, but now they were free. Family, though reunited, still bore the marks of the curse. Elisa could see it in their eyes, their pain, their sorrow, their longing for the past. But it was also clear that the curse had not broken their spirits. In fact, it had only strengthened their bond. Together, they had overcome the most impossible of trials. Elisa's thoughts turned inward to the years she had spent in silence, to the isolation she had endured. There had been times when she had doubted whether she could complete the task, whether the sacrifice was too great. But now, as she looked at her brothers, healthy, whole, and with smiles on their faces, she understood that love, when it is pure and unwavering, has the power to heal the deepest of wounds. The family had been broken, but now they were whole. Again, Elisa had become the embodiment of selflessness, her sacrifice transforming not just her brothers, but herself. She had learned the true meaning of love and devotion, that it was not just about receiving or giving, but about sharing strength in the face of adversity, about remaining steadfast, even when all seems lost. The days passed in quiet happiness, and Elisa found herself no longer burdened by the silence that had once consumed her. As her brothers resumed their place in the kingdom, they too found new purpose in their lives. They were no longer swans. They were free men, bound not by a curse, but by a shared journey of love and sacrifice. And Elisa, having broken the curse, felt a sense of peace in her heart. She no longer carried the weight of the curse, nor did she carry the silence that had once been her prison dot. As the seasons changed, so too did the lives of Elisa and her brothers. The curse was nothing more than a distant memory now, but the lessons they had learned from the ordeal remained, etched deeply into their hearts. Elisa, once a quiet and solitary figure, had blossomed into someone full of life and wisdom. She no longer lived in the shadow of sacrifice, but stood tall, proud of the journey she had undertaken. Her brothers, free from the curse that had bound them for so long, too had transformed. They were not the same men they had been before their curse. They were stronger, wiser, and more deeply connected to Elisa and the world around them. The kingdom had regained its peace, but Elisa knew that it was not just the curse that had been broken. It was the family's bond, forged in the fire of love and sacrifice. Her brothers had not only been freed from their physical forms as swans, but had been reborn in spirit. They had witnessed firsthand the power of selflessness, the strength of love that endures, and the sacrifices required for true freedom. The bond that now united them was not just one of blood, it was one of shared struggle, of mutual respect, and admiration. Elisa's brothers had often spoken of the time when they were swans, of the loneliness they had felt, of the longing to be near her, but also the understanding that their curse had been necessary for their spiritual growth. Elisa's journey had not only freed them physically, but had given them a new perspective on life. They no longer took for granted the beauty of human connection, the warmth of family, or the importance of living with purpose. Asterisk as the family gathered around the table one evening. Elisa smiled at her brothers, now seated beside her, their faces glowing with joy and gratitude. The castle, once cold and distant, now felt like a home again. It was a place of laughter, warmth, and love, a place where reconciliation had taken root and where every moment was filled with a quiet reverence for the sacrifices made. Her brothers spoke of the years lost, the time spent as swans flying over forests and lakes, but they had come to understand that this had been part of their journey. They had learned to value life in ways they never could have imagined before. The absence of human form had made them more attuned to their true selves. They could now see that the bond between them and Eliza was far deeper than mere family. It was woven into the fabric of their souls. In the days that followed, Elisa and her brothers decided to return to the kingdom's capital, to the bustling streets and vibrant markets that had once felt so distant. They walked together as a family, hand in hand, no longer burdened by the curse or the silence that had once separated them. They were free to live their lives to the fullest, free to love without limits, and free to speak and laugh and be together. When they arrived at the castle, the people of the kingdom rejoiced. The king, who had once feared for his family's safety, now saw them all restored, his children whole again. He marveled at Elisa's strength, at her ability to remain steadfast in the face of the greatest challenge, and at the love she had poured into saving her brothers. Elisa, however, remained humble. She had done what she had done not for glory, not for praise, but out of love. She had loved her brothers more than anything else in the world, and it was this love that had given her the courage to endure the silence and the pain. She knew, in her heart, that the greatest reward was not the freedom of her brothers, but the deep connection they now shared, one that would last for all eternity. The castle became a place of celebration, but it was also a place of peace. Elisa, now the queen of her family, had learned that true strength comes from sacrifice, that the greatest bonds are forged in times of adversity, and that love, even in its purest form, requires courage to thrive. As the sun set on the kingdom that had once been cursed, Eliza and her brothers stood together, gazing out over the land. They had journeyed through darkness and emerged into the light, not just physically, but in spirit as well. The curse was gone, but its lessons would remain with them forever. The family was whole, and together they would face whatever the future held, united by love and by the knowledge that no matter what, they had each other. As the days turned to weeks and the weeks into months, Elisa's life slowly returned to normal. The shadows of the past, the years of silence, isolation, and sacrifice began to fade, leaving only the light of love and unity in their place. The family, once torn apart by the curse, now moved as one, bonded by the enduring power of Elisa's selfless love. The transformation of her brothers from swans back to their human forms was not just a physical return, but a spiritual rebirth. Elisa's deep connection with them had restored them in ways they would never fully be able to express. But in their eyes, Elisa could see the gratitude and love they felt. Elisa, though still the same kind-hearted princess, had undergone her own transformation. The silent, suffering girl who had once lived in isolation had blossomed into a woman of strength and wisdom. Her sacrifice had shaped her, making her stronger, more resilient, and more compassionate than ever before. Her brothers no longer saw her as the fragile, silent girl she had been. They saw her as their hero, the one who had saved them when all hope seemed lost. The kingdom began to heal too. The people who had watched with bated breath as the royal family struggled under the weight of the curse now rejoiced in the family's reunion. The streets, once heavy with uncertainty, were now filled with laughter, music, and celebration. The story of Elisa's sacrifice spread throughout the kingdom, becoming a legend that would be passed down through the ages. The kingdom, once shadowed by sorrow, was now bathed in light, a light that had come from the pure love of a sister for her brothers. But even as Eliza basked in the warmth of this new life, there were still moments of reflection. The journey she had taken had left its mark on her. The years of silence, the unbearable loneliness, the pain of sacrificing so much for the sake of others, it had changed her in ways she hadn't yet fully understood. But through it all, Eliza had found a deep sense of peace within herself. She had come to understand that love was not just an emotion, but a force capable of overcoming even the darkest of spells. One evening, as she walked alone in the castle gardens, the soft night breeze brushing through her hair, Eliza reflected on the path she had walked. She thought of the silent years spent in the forest, the pain she had endured, and the longing she had felt to speak to her brothers. She thought of the curse that had separated them, and how that separation had only made their eventual reunion that much sweeter. Dot, as she stood by the edge of the garden, gazing up at the stars, Elisa's heart swelled with gratitude. She had given so much, yet had received so much more in return. The love of her brothers, their reunion, the healing of the family. It was all more than she could have ever dreamed of in that moment. Elisa realized that true love was not about the end result or the reward. It was about the journey, about the sacrifices made along the way, the hardships endured, and the strength found in the face of adversity. It was about giving without expecting, and about loving even when it seemed like all hope was lost. Dot, as the years went by, Eliza and her brothers continued to live in peace. The curse had been broken, but the lessons learned from the journey were never forgotten. Elisa's sacrifice was a reminder to them all that love, in its purest, most selfless form, had the power to transform and heal. And so, the legacy of Elisa's love lived on, not only in the hearts of her brothers, but in the very soul of the kingdom itself. The tale of the steadfast princess, the girl who had sacrificed her voice for the sake of her family, was told for generations, a story that would inspire countless others to believe in the power of love and sacrifice. The days passed by in a steady, tranquil rhythm, as if the very land itself had exhaled a deep sigh of relief after the long years of darkness. Elisa and her brothers, now free from the curse, had begun to rebuild their lives together. The royal palace, once filled with an eerie emptiness, now hummed with life, the walls echoing with the laughter of children and the warmth of familial love. The servants, too, seemed lighter in spirit, knowing that the cruel reign of the queen had ended and that peace had returned to the kingdom. Elisa had come to realize that her journey, though filled with hardship, had made her stronger, not just in body, but in spirit. Her love for her brothers, her dedication to them, and her willingness to sacrifice everything for their well-being had transformed her in ways she could not have imagined. She now walked through the halls of the palace with her head held high, no longer burdened by the weight of silence. Her voice, once lost in the struggle, now had the freedom to speak, to express the deep joy she felt in being reunited with her family. The king, her father, watched with pride as his children, his whole family, came together. He had witnessed Elisa's sacrifice firsthand and had been in awe of her unwavering determination. He had seen her silence, her grief, and the pain she had endured. But now he saw the strength she had gained from her trials. The kingdom, once lost in the shadow of the curse, now flourished with a renewed sense of purpose and harmony. One afternoon, Elisa and her brothers ventured to the fields outside the castle. The sun was warm on their faces, and the gentle breeze swept through the tall grass, creating ripples across the meadow. Elisa smiled as she watched her brothers run and play as they had once done, their laughter filling the air once more. It was a sound she had longed to hear, the sound of joy, free from the restraints of magic and silence. The transformation in Elisa was not only physical, but emotional as well. The silence that had bound her, the years spent in isolation, had forged a new understanding of what truly mattered in life. It was not the pursuit of power or wealth, but the connections she had with the people she loved, the bonds of family, the sacrifices made for one another, and the love shared were the most important things in the world. She had learned this through her journey, and now she carried this understanding with her, guiding her actions and shaping her future. Her brothers, too, had been changed by the curse. They were not the same as they had been before, but there was a new depth to them. They had spent years as swans, wandering the skies in solitude, and during that time, they had learned to appreciate the simple joys of life, the touch of a loved one's hand, the warmth of a family dinner, the laughter shared between friends. They had been given a second chance, and they vowed never to take it for granted. As the evening sun dipped below the horizon, Elisa and her brothers returned to the palace. The night was filled with the sound of celebration, the music of violins, and the laughter of the people echoing through the halls. The kingdom had not only regained its peace, but had also been renewed by the love and sacrifice that had saved it. With each passing day, the kingdom flourished under the leadership of Elisa and her brothers. The once dismal halls of the castle now rang with laughter, song, and liveliness. The curse was a distant memory, but its lessons remained ever present in the hearts of the royal family. Elisa's journey had not only transformed her brothers, but had also redefined the very foundation of the kingdom. The people of the land, who had long lived under the shadow of the curse, now looked to their royal family with admiration and gratitude, recognizing the strength that had emerged from adversity. Elisa, no longer bound by the silence of her sacrifice, took on a new role within the kingdom. Her voice, once silenced by the curse, was now filled with wisdom and compassion. She spoke of love, patience, and sacrifice, the very virtues that had allowed her to break the curse and bring her brothers back. The people found strength in her words, and her example of resilience became a beacon of hope throughout the land. Elisa's leadership was defined by her ability to connect with her people, to listen to their needs, and to guide them with a heart full of empathy. Her brothers, too, had found their places in the kingdom. They had all witnessed the power of Elisa's selflessness, and each of them sought to honor it by contributing to the kingdom's prosperity. They became leaders in their own right, each taking on important roles in governance, administration, and diplomacy. The once silent, secluded brothers were now active and engaged in the kingdom's rebuilding, working alongside Elisa to ensure that the peace they had fought so hard for would last for generations. The people of the kingdom, who had once feared that the curse would never end, now saw the royal family as a symbol of hope. Elisa's sacrifice and love had not only saved her brothers, but had healed the entire kingdom. The land, once clouded by darkness, now bloomed with life and prosperity. The fields were full of crops, the markets bustling with traders, and the castles and homes filled with the sounds of family and friendship. Elisa had not just broken the curse, she had rekindled the spirit of unity and love that had been missing for so long. As Eliza stood on the balcony of the castle, gazing out over the kingdom that had now become a place of peace and harmony, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The work had not been easy, and there were days when she had doubted whether she could endure the pain and isolation. But now, as she looked at the smiling faces of her brothers and the happy people of the kingdom, she realized that it had all been worth it. The sacrifice, the years of silence, the pain had all led to this moment of peace, this moment of family and love. One evening, as the sun set behind the castle walls, Elisa walked through the garden with her brothers, the soft light of dusk illuminating their path. The garden was in full bloom, vibrant flowers covering the pathways and filling the air with their sweet fragrance. Elisa smiled as she gazed at the flowers, her heart light with happiness. It was as if the kingdom itself had come alive with their reunion, blooming in the warmth of their restored love. Her brothers, now fully grown and restored, walked alongside her. There was no longer any shadow between them. They laughed as they reminisced about the time before the curse, recounting the fun they'd shared and the mischief they'd caused. But now, as they spoke, their words carried a sense of gratitude for the second chance at life, for the family they had fought to restore, and for the love that had brought them all together. Elisa paused for a moment, feeling the cool evening breeze against her face, and turned to her brothers. "We've come so far," she said softly, "and through everything, we're whole again. Our love, our bond is unbreakable." Her brothers smiled in agreement, each of them quietly thankful for the journey they had shared. The pain of the past had been replaced with hope for the future. Their lives, once touched by darkness, were now illuminated by light, a light that had been kindled by Elisa's unwavering love and sacrifice as they stood together. United and free, Eliza realized that the true magic of her journey was not in the breaking of the curse, but in the love that had made everything possible. Love, after all, was the most powerful force in the world. It was the force that had restored her family, healed her brothers, and transformed a kingdom once shadowed by fear and despair into a place of peace and hope. As time flowed gently forward, Elisa's heart remained light, her spirit no longer burdened by the past. The castle, once steeped in sorrow and silence, now echoed with the sounds of joy. The laughter of children, the bustling voices of the townspeople, and the hum of the royal court filled the air, a constant reminder that peace and love had triumphed over darkness. The kingdom, under Elisa's quiet but steadfast leadership, blossomed. The people flourished in the warmth of the love that had restored their royal family. Elisa often walked through the palace gardens, surrounded by the vibrant blooms and lush greenery that mirrored the growth she had witnessed in her brothers and in herself. The air was always fresh, carrying the fragrance of roses and the faint whispers of the wind that seemed to carry the memories of their long journey, the trials they had faced together, and the eventual victory they had earned. The garden, once a symbol of solitude for Eliza, had transformed into a place of serenity and reunion, a space where Eliza could reflect on her past sacrifices and look toward the future with hope. One evening, as the sun began to set and the cool breeze swept through the garden, Eliza stood at the edge of the castle balcony. Below, she could see her brothers, now fully restored to their human forms, laughing and talking with the people of the kingdom. Their joy was infectious, their presence a constant reminder of the love that had bound them together through the most difficult of trials. Elisa smiled softly as she watched them, her companions, her protectors, her brothers, the ones she had fought so hard to save. In that moment, she realized that the greatest gift was not the freedom of the curse, but the reconnection with the family she had nearly lost. Their journey had taught them all the value of love, the depth of sacrifice, and the strength of unity. Their bond was now unbreakable, forged in the fires of hardship and sealed by the courage and devotion Eliza had shown. Elisa's thoughts turned to her father, the king who had always believed in the strength of his children. He had watched as Elisa had grown into a woman capable of overcoming the impossible. He had seen the depth of her love and selflessness and recognized the power in the choices she had made. Her brothers, too, had changed not only in appearance but in spirit. They had learned through their curse to value their family in ways they had never known before. Their return to human form was not just a physical restoration, but a spiritual renewal for each of them. Elisa turned her gaze toward the horizon, where the last light of day dipped below the hills. The stars were beginning to shimmer, and the soft light of the moon kissed the earth, filling the air with calm. It was a moment of quiet reflection. Elisa knew that the road ahead would not always be easy, but the love she had for her brothers and the love they shared was a foundation that would endure. Her brothers approached her, and as they stood by her side, Eliza felt a deep sense of peace settle within her heart. She could hear their voices filled with warmth and affection, and for the first time in years, the weight of silence had lifted completely. Elisa knew that, together, they would face whatever life brought their way. Her journey of sacrifice had not only transformed her life, but had also healed her family. It had restored them, not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually, and as a whole dot as the stars filled the night sky above them. Eliza took a deep breath, feeling the cool evening air fill her lungs. She was no longer the silent girl who had wept alone in the forest. She was the princess, the sister, and now she would be known as the healer, the one whose love had broken the curse and restored her family. She had found her voice, not in words, but in the actions and sacrifices she had made. Her voice, her heart, her soul had spoken through her deeds, and it was these deeds that had shaped not only the kingdom but also the future. Elisa's heart swelled with love as she looked at her brothers. She had saved them, and in doing so, she had saved herself. Together, they would continue to build their lives in the kingdom, cherishing each day, each moment together, knowing that they had endured the impossible and come out on the other side, stronger and more united than ever before. The curse was no more dot, and in its place was a kingdom filled with love. A family that was now bound forever by the power of sacrifice, faith, and the undying bond of love. Elisa, with the strength of her journey behind her, was ready to face whatever future awaited her and her brothers together as a family for all eternity.